Kind of interesting that it really became a much bigger part of my life. It was almost like the perfect setup, to be honest, to go in and have a very, very profound experience that was, frankly, life-changing. It really kicked my ass, to be honest. Like, I was humbled by witnessing all of that, really noticing and feeling I had zero control over it. And yet at the same time, like, also experiencing this immense power to be with all of that. I grew up in a very small town in rural Canada where recreational drugs were actually used widely in my school, and it was easy to get access to them. I just wasn't interested in them. And I have to admit, I was fairly judgmental about people who did. I was a pretty strong student. I was very driven, even at a young age. It just didn't fit in with my worldview, I think, at the time. I remember when I got into my 20s, I would go out and enjoy a drink with friends, knew how to have a good time, but just drugs in general were never part of my recreational experience or anything else. I found it was surprising to get to a point where I was so open to the experience. Kind of interesting that it really became a much bigger part of my life. I was in my late 20s by that point and was working with a coach at the time. I hired that coach really to help me build my own coaching and training business. I wasn't even aware at the time that that was some of the work that he did. As we continued to do some work together and I was aware of some of my own personal issues, the opportunity came up in our conversation that, this could be an option that would really be helpful because I'd never really been interested in any kind of recreational drugs. I was a little bit, I wouldn't say taken aback, but it was just new. I'd never heard of this before. I was kind of curious about it, and honestly, I think at the time, because I was really struggling with some personal issues, I was way more open to anything that could be helpful. It was, really intriguing to me that this particular kind of substance could be so useful in that context. I was really struggling at the time with some emotional issues that were even difficult for me to name. I think I mentioned I was a fairly driven kid. I was a really strong student, and when I got into my 20s, I actually had the great fortune of being involved with some pretty powerful transformational work. I had a chance to go work with one of the leaders in the world that was doing seminars at that time. And it really was just the most invaluable business and personal experience. But it was also very, very challenging work. It was a very stressful environment to work in. I was like the only female that worked with a team of, very driven type A men. And I worked really hard to keep up and really contribute to that team. Like a lot of people, I think, who are involved in stressful careers, the impact of that wasn't apparent right away. It took some time. But I was aware at a certain point that I had definitely absorbed a lot of that kind of stress without processing it properly. I was really kind of paying a price in terms of sort of my levels of anxiety and just sort of, lack of wellness overall. And got to a point too, actually, I remember too, I'd gone through some really difficult personal experiences. I think I'd gone through a very sad and challenging romantic breakup at the time. And I really didn't have the space in my life to process that appropriately. And I think it just all compounded and got to the point where I could tell something wasn't right. I was having a hard time like being alone with myself. I just constantly felt on edge and like was aware that there was just something in my nervous system that was really troublesome. When I was given this opportunity, to potentially address this with psychedelic therapy, I was, luckily in a place where I was feeling kind of desperate and really open to anything. It's challenging to put it into words. I think anyone who's experienced that work, would struggle to actually be able to define it accurately. But for me, it was such a perfect experience. It was a very challenging experience, I have to be honest. Perhaps many of you have heard of the sort of innate healing intelligence that, we all have. I mean, if you cut your finger, we have that capacity for our body to heal. For me, going into that experience, I had some very unhealthy behaviors, I would say at the time. I had, a very strong desire to control things in my life and to look good and to present myself in a particular way. That was really inspired and kind of fostered through the work I was doing. There was a lot of attention and acknowledgement given to myself and others that I worked with for being high performers and for doing great work and for looking good and being leaders and all of that. So, quite honestly, I think I developed this sort of relationship with myself that wasn't really working. When I first had my MDMA experience, what was so incredibly powerful about that was that there was just no hiding from who I was. And what I mean by that is, I got to witness myself firsthand participating in this experience with all of those very dysfunctional behaviors. I was trying to control it. I was trying to look good through a lot of it. Thankfully, the practitioner, the guide that I was working with, was so skilled, and he just let me show up the way that I really needed to show up. He really didn't interfere. But I remember as I went through that, like observing myself in these ways and really seeing, for the first time, how these habits, these behaviors, these ways of being were certainly not serving me in my life, were causing me an enormous amount of stress and anxiety, and also, just that there was more available to me than that. And that innate healing intelligence, I got to really experience that. I think for the first time, I really got to get in touch with this aspect of myself that we all have, that knows how to heal itself given the right conditions and the right circumstances. I got to really witness my unconscious unwinding and just observing, these aspects of myself that I hadn't confronted, these emotions that I had been avoiding for a long time. I became really skilled in my 20s at sidestepping difficult emotions and repressing certain things so that I could get out there and perform and achieve. And, it was just the most humbling experience, to be honest, to see all of that come out and be witnessed in a way that was so incredibly helpful. For me, it really kicked my ass, to be honest. Like, I was humbled by witnessing all of that, really noticing and feeling I had zero control over it. And yet at the same time, like also experiencing this immense power to be with all of that in a way that was incredibly enlightening and beneficial. As a result of all of that, I really got to lean into that part of myself that I learned to trust and to have more faith, I think, in myself too, for being able to navigate life in general. Like to really touch into that wisdom in a way that helped me appreciate that, me, the personality, me, the person, the ego, the one that's out there, trying to accomplish so much in my life, that there was a much greater connection to something beyond that I may have sensed intuitively, but I never had a direct experience of it in that way. And I think that's really what I say I would have taken away from that. It wasn't an understanding, it was a knowing of that deeper part of myself that, truly has informed so much of my life since that time. Like I learned to truly trust that aspect of myself, that deeper part that is much wiser than me, the person, and that really, can provide enormous guidance and answers. I think for the first time, I really did discover who I really was beyond the personality, beyond, this sort of ego structure that I created about myself, to really experience myself as, it sounds maybe a little lofty, but like as a spiritual being having a human experience, like to really experience what that's like and realize that that is sort of the orientation or the compass that I'm going to use to navigate my life from this point. And I think what happened to me as a byproduct is that it really, in one session, I certainly had other experiences after that, but I think in that one session, it really flipped my compass, my orientation to life from being someone who, was still in many ways trying to prove myself, trying to prove my worth to myself and to others, and going about that in very conventional ways, the sort of typical career success or financial success that I was after, to truly experiencing a much deeper, richer dimension of life and experience, and to recognize the value of that and the value of connecting to that and exploring that. That, without a doubt, has, really shaped a lot of my decisions and my experiences since then. And I think it just really changed me as a person. I think became much more rooted and grounded in this deeper sense of being. I noticed a difference in my choices. I noticed that I was way more willing and interested in being versus doing. And although I still was pretty driven and did a lot of, work in my career and still accomplished a lot of things, it really was from a different place. It was from a place of beingness versus doingness. And I think that drive, that original drive I had that was so much about trying to disprove my worth, wasn't as strong. I think what I created after that came much more from a place of joy and just pure love of creating things, versus, having to be a certain way or do certain things to kind of be approved of. Honestly, that first experience really lit up an already pretty strong desire to learn and to experience deeper dimensions of life. I went on from that, to do many more of those types of experiences and to pursue opportunities that really helped me further touch on those sort of more spiritual dimensions or deeper dimensions of myself. It really helped me, I think, too, just become a much happier person. I was way more present, way more able to just be with people and enjoy the moment versus constantly striving, to get somewhere or to accomplish something. Thankfully, I was connected to other people who were doing that work at the time. So I had this wonderful community that understood some of the transformation I was going through and some of the changes I was going through. And I think all of that really helped me to ground and integrate that kind of new way of being in the world in a way that it really became long lasting and certainly had like some long-term permanent effect. I know without a doubt I would not be the person that I am today if I hadn't had that first initial experience. I would not be doing the work that I'm doing today. I would not have the level of connection or love or gratitude or insight or depth or wisdom without the psychedelic work that I did and continue to do. If you're looking to explore psychedelics or plant medicines from a position of like therapeutic healing or your own personal evolution, that those truly are amazing tools. And using those substances with great intention, the idea of set and setting and having enormous intention about what you want to explore or heal through that work really does cause people to have pretty profound healing experiences or transformational experiences. And so I do feel like someone like myself sharing my story hopefully helps people recognize the value of that in a way that they may not have. And I really recommend the people that are curious, get educated, talk to people, and see if this is an option that could be useful for you too.